Welcome back. Joining me in the studio now, like I promised, is Jeri Smith-Ready. Jeri, welcome to Fast Forward.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. Love your show.
Thank you. Now, you've got your new book is out now, which is Wicked Game, a very interesting book about a very unusual radio station.
Certainly. I hope it's unusual at least.
Yeah, yeah. This is a radio station where the DJs are vampires.
That's true.
Now, they're unusual vampires. They're not the usual take on a vampire. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you did to do a little twist?
Sure. What I decided to do with my vampires is to have them sort of psychologically, culturally, existentially, if you will, stuck in the era in which they were turned. And why this ties in particularly well with music is because music is such a touchstone for a certain cultural era, whether it be, there's a 1940s blues vampire DJ. He was turned because he went to the crossroads at midnight to meet the devil to sell his soul so that he could master the blues, that old legend. And instead of meeting the devil, he met a vampire. There's a rockabilly vampire DJ who was there at the birth of rock and roll in Memphis with Sun Records and Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and all of them. There's a hippie DJ, of course. No musical era would be complete without that. There's a reggae DJ for the 70s instead of disco.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then, of course, there's the 80s punk goth DJ, Regina, who is actually probably out of all of them the only one who looks and acts like a vampire. And then, of course, we have the 90s grunge DJ, Shane, who is more or less the hero of the book.
Right. And the heroine of the book is also fairly interesting because she comes from an interesting background. She's a con man.
Right, yeah. She's a different kind of predator,
yeah.
Which is why it actually makes her perfectly suited for this kind of job, partly because she can really sympathize with she's in no moral place to judge a vampire for taking what they need to survive, because that's what she's done, it's just money instead of blood in her background. And what she does is the radio station is in danger of being bought out by a communications conglomerate. If they were bought out, the DJs would be fired and they would just kind of do a vanilla standard radio station format. And without this connection to their original lifetimes, the DJs would sort of what they call fade, which means they sort of slowly go insane and become ghosts of the past, and they're just they lose their humanity if they lose touch with their original lifetime. And so her job, she's an intern. She's in college. She's kind of on the 7 or 8 year plan. She's got one more year to finish college, and she needs an internship to complete that. And so she takes an internship as a marketing person for this radio station, when she doesn't realize they're vampires at the time. And so her big idea is to basically hide the vampires in plain sight, come out to the public and say, guess what? These DJs are vampires, and that's how they know their music so well. And of course, she knows nobody will believe it because it's really silly. But the public loves vampires, and so it becomes very popular, and the ratings go through the roof, and everybody's really into the vampire shtick. And it's very commercial, and it really plays into that love of vampires in our society. And everybody is all with it because it means the vampires can survive, except for the hero, Shane, he's a 90s grunge guy, so he's all about authenticity. It's all about the music for him. He's very anti-commercial. And so there's a bit of a conflict between her commercial end of it and doing whatever it takes to get this, to get them to survive, and his feeling that, it's all about the music, it shouldn't be about vampires. And what happens if somebody discovers we really are vampires? Won't that put us in a little bit of danger? And so there's that anytime you put vampires in a modern day society, there is always that edge of how careful they have to be to survive. Like a lot of vampires in fiction, mine can't go out in the day. they'll die if they have sunlight. And there's of course the wooden stake things and the holy water and all of that. So
And
they
the wooden
do.
stake thing that you do is a little bit nastier than the poof they turn into dust.
Right, it's a little more graphic than that.
Yes.
Yes.
And you've also, which I really like, gave the vampires kind of OCD.
Right. Well, this also ties into their issues of being stuck in time when they're in a situation like modern day life, and they feel out of place, and they feel out of control, and their obsessive compulsive behaviors are a way to get back that control. As Shane says, it's the only way to stay sane or to feel sane. And that is, OCD is about control. I mean, when people exhibit those behaviors, it's a way they feel, but they don't necessarily want to do it, but they feel better when they do. It's that pattern. So Shane is an obsessive compulsive sorter. He likes to alphabetize things, which I can relate to. It boggles my mind that there are people that have books on their shelves that aren't in alphabetical order, or CDs that just, I can't imagine. How would you find anything?
That's what my wife is for. She knows where everything is.
So yes, in one of the early scenes, there's a part where he gets distracted from seducing the heroine because he has to alphabetize her CD collection. So. And then Regina is a compulsive counter, which that's actually where I got the idea for making them OCD. Was there's an Eastern European legend about if you want to keep vampires away from your house, you scatter rice all over your walkway, and they'll stop and count them. And I don't know. I would love to go back and find out if that's where Jim Henson got the idea for the Count from Sesame Street, where he's if anybody was ever OCD on the Muppets, it would be him. I mean, he's just so I think it might have just been a play on the word count, but there might have been that other dimension to it. So she's a compulsive counter, which becomes a little bit of a trip up for her in one scene.
Yes. Now, what kind of research did you do, particularly for the con man part of it? That must have been kind of fun.
Oh, it's fascinating. That's one thing I could never do. I'm a terrible liar, except for the writing fiction thing.
Yeah, except for the fact that you're a professional liar.
Yeah, I write lies for a living, but and it's fun. But I read a lot of books. I read both from the perspectives of con artists and from the people who prosecute them. And the latter was particularly sobering because I think it was an FBI agent who wrote this one book that I read. He kept reminding us that these people seem very charming. I mean, you see them in The Sting or on Hustle or on any of these, or on Lost or in this book. They come across as very charming because that's how they make their living, but they hurt people. They take their money, and they not only take their money, but they take their sense of trust in the world. And that's ultimately why Kira, before the book begins, she did something that really made herself feel like kind of went over the edge for her. And so now she's trying to make good by being a marketing intern, which is really not too much of a jump from con artistry to marketing and advertising at all. So that in a way it's sort of her redemption quest. If she can she's not going to, maybe, save all the starving children in Africa, but she's going to save 6 vampires at least.
That's something.
Save their jobs,
That's something.
So.
And from your research, because her parents were both con people.
Right. They were fake faith healers.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting dimension to her, because she grew up as a child, she wasn't quite, it took her a while, I think, to understand that they were not, the people that they were helping were really being hurt. And so when she discovered that her parents were using religion and using people's faith and hope and trust to get money out of them, it made her deeply cynical and deeply skeptical.
And deeply non-religious, which
right.
is an interesting aspect in the book too to her.
Because and that's a thing that I continue to explore in the book, in the sequel, is because in this book, holy items do have an effect on vampires, and so she can see that, but she thinks, well, why? is there something there to this, or what are the dimensions of that she can understand and kind of reconcile with her skepticism? I mean, just the very fact that vampires exist at all really kind of are an assault on reason.
Yeah, because a lot of times, a lot of the book is about trust and faith.
Yeah,
her
absolutely.
wanting to be able to trust, and
Right.
whether they can trust her at all. And tell what can we look forward to in the sequel to it?
Well, it's more fun times and more challenges for the radio station, of course, because I mean, it is tied to our reality. It's supposed to be our world. It's not an alternative or a parallel universe. So there are a lot of issues and a lot of challenges for radio today, a lot of competition. So the question is, how do they, and eventually the audience is going to get bored with just vampires. So they have to take it to another level of controversy and notoriety to keep people interested. And that sort of happens to them by an illegal broadcaster sort of pirates their frequency and starts going on these religious rants against the occult and against vampires and particularly against women. They only do the interruptions when either a female artist is being played or when Regina is on the air.
And she's so nice and sweet.
Right. She just takes it like very maturely.
Yeah. Well, that's not the only series of books you have going right now. You also have a series out from Luna, which was Eyes of Crow, and the second book was Voice of Crow. And those are very interesting too. They're fantasy, but there's a almost science fictional feel, because you realize as you read them that they're in our future.
Right.
And what got you into writing those? Because your first book, Requiem for the Devil, was a kind of an urban, dark fantasy about the devil falling in love.
Right. And living in D.C.
And living in D.C., which isn't surprising.
No, it's not really fantasy.
But you go in the Crow books, and they're much more of a kind of pastoral in a sense.
Oh, definitely.
What got you into wanting to do that kind of thing?
Well, part of it comes out of my lifelong interest in animals and nature and wilderness. I actually have I went to graduate school at Maryland for environmental policy, and got my degree in that, and learned a lot and thought a lot about humanity's relationship with nature, and that's really the overarching theme of the Aspect of Crow trilogy. And I really think that it is almost a tragedy the way people have become separated, both individually and as a society, from nature. I mean, you see children who spend all their time indoors, or video games, television, whatever, and they lose touch with the natural world. And when I was a kid, I played in the backyard all the time, and somehow I entertained myself with that.
How could you do that?
Bugs and flowers, and mostly bugs. So that in the Aspect of Crow trilogy, people have magic. Everyone has magic. It's not just the special people. Everyone in the society has magic based on their guardian spirit animal. And I always say it's sort of like X-Men meets Clan of the Cave Bear. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but in a way it is sort of like that, because everybody has the powers that you would think of as associated with a certain animal. And Rhea, the main character, she has the Aspect of Crow, which is associated with death. She, in her first phase, she can tell when people are going to die. If they're near death, she can tell if they're going to die or not, which makes her very useful in a battlefield for triage purposes. Yes. And then her second phase, which is covered in Voice of Crow, she can speak to the dead and actually, go into that sort of limbo area between here and the other side to chat.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things about this kind of spirit animal aspect to the book, is the phases, because it's tied to kind of how you grow as a person and what goes on in your life. When you I think the second phase starts when you conceive a child. Yeah.
Right. So
and when you want to conceive it, not it.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Well, it starts when you conceive a child,
Yeah.
but if you're not ready, sort of emotionally or spiritually, I guess, for that child, then your powers can become perverted and really mess you up in a way. Like Merrick, the hero of the first book, he had, a couple years before this book, he and his mate, which is sort of like a girlfriend, and girlfriend and boyfriend just sounded a little too modern for an epic fantasy series. So he and his mate had a child, and they weren't ready, and he was very young and scared and wasn't ready to take responsibility. And so the wolf's second phase power is to become invisible at night, but because he wasn't ready, he could not be invisible at night. So every night when the sun goes down, you can't see him. And that's not something, that's a great power to have, but not if you can't control it.
Not if you can't control it. And then in the second book, it moves into, the descendants as well. And you also did something interesting there, which is you expanded the point of view characters. Eyes of Crow is strictly from Rio's point of view.
Correct.
And in Voices of Crow, you use, what is it, four?
Four, right.
Point of view characters as we move into the descendants, which are the people in the area that do not have, where the powers don't work.
Right. The descendants are literally descended from the people of this book. They broke off, they sort of schismed at one point and moved to another geographical area and built cities and became very enamored with their powers as humans. They created this pantheon of human-like gods. And so they sort of renounced the spirits, and so the spirits in return renounced them, took their magic away. And but in the second book, one of the point of view characters is a descendant soldier, and so we get to see a little bit of the other side. And I found it actually very easy to relate to that character of Philip, because he's more like us than any of the other characters in the book. I mean, because the descendants are a lot more like our society. I sort of see them as maybe one part ancient Rome, like one part colonial or early United States, and 3 parts I made it up a stand.
This is what you do.
Right.
And I understand you've also now turned in the third book of the trilogy, which is actually a trilogy.
A 3-book trilogy.
A 3-book trilogy.
One of those rare.
Called The Reawaken.
That's correct. Yeah.
And when can we expect to see that?
That'll be in November.
In November.
November 1st of 2008.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited to wrap that up. There was a lot of storylines to wrap up, and it actually takes place. The Reawaken takes place about 20 years after the end of Voice of Crow, so everything has changed, and so you get to see how that they deal with that. There's a lot of guerrilla warfare going on, and you get to see, it's a little bit, I'm not being hopefully too pretentious when I say this, but it's a little bit like War and Peace in that there are battle scenes and a lot of the action adventure things going on, but at the same time you get to see how it affects people on a very microcosmic level, the relationships between lovers or between father and daughter and mother and son and all that sort of thing, and how particularly in Voice of Crow and in Reawakened, I dealt a lot with how war affects people in society, not just the warriors, but also the people on the home front and the people left behind, and how battle and killing affects people psychologically and spiritually in the aftermath.
Well, I really am looking forward to it. We're running out of time. So I hope everyone will look for The Reawakened in November, and then at some point we should get the sequel to Wicked Game. So keep an eye out for those books. Well, Jeri, thank you very much for coming on Fast Forward.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
And so, for all of us here at Fast Forward, this is Mike Zipser saying, take care.